Thousands evacuated along England's east coast after warnings of a tidal surge and gale force winds. Tonight, dozens of flood warnings remain in place, some severe, stretching from Essex to Northumberland, and the Army is on standby to help.
We spoke to individuals. We made sure that they had a plan to leave their property should the situation deteriorate further, and we just provided a bit of reassurance that the security services were ready to go.
We'll have the latest from along the coastline tonight. Also on News at 10. The row over the NHS. The PM points the finger of blame at some GPs tonight for the crisis in England's A&E. Tristram Hunt, tipped as a future Labour leader, quits as MP and triggers another by-election. How many more might follow him? And Lord Snowdon, married to Princess Margaret at the height of the swinging 60s, has died.
This is ITV News at 10 with Julie Etchingham.
Good evening. All day, communities along Britain's east coast have been preparing for the worst. Hundreds of homes have been evacuated, coastal defences reinforced, streets and houses sandbagged, the Army and emergency services deployed and at the ready. And here is why. This is the live shot of the government's official flood alert service. Warning triangles, as you can see, in a deep red cluster, warning in many cases of danger to life. The fear remains that tonight's high tide, which started peaking about half an hour ago in some places, will combine with high winds and break through the sea wall. The emergency services are taking no chances.
Great Yarmouth is a town besieged by the tide tonight. The storm surge created by high winds off the east coast have swelled the river almost to breaking point. With thousands of properties at risk of flooding, hoping the water didn't break through was all that was left for those living here. All day, people did what they could to protect their homes. Sandbags were a makeshift last line of defence for those closest to the water. Residents in some 5,000 homes in Great Yarmouth were urged to leave, but Daisy and her son Sanchez decided to move themselves to higher ground instead.
We're going to stick it out as long as we can.
You're just going to hide upstairs, are you, and watch?
Yeah, and hope for the best.
On the North Yorkshire coast, people and pets ignored warnings to stay away from the waves. For some, a soaking could be considered a lucky escape. As the water found its way over the top and into the streets, those unable to get out of its way could only watch and wait.
Well, it happened last time and it was a metre high, so I'm just hoping it's not as bad as last time.
In Essex, thousands of residents in the coastal village of Jaywick were told to evacuate. Warned by the emergency services, their homes could be under 3 metres of water by high tide at midnight.
A bit worrying, really. We've only been here 2 years and it's the sort of first time we've been warned to go, basically. So it's a bit of a worry because, you know, come down here for a nice life by the sea.
But as the waves crashed in up and down the east coast, hundreds of soldiers were on standby to respond.
We spoke to individuals. We made sure that they had a plan to leave their property should the situation deteriorate further, and we just provided a bit of reassurance that the security services were ready to go.
Away from the coast, snow and ice combined with the high winds to cause hazardous driving conditions. Many schools, like this one in Greater Manchester, were forced to close. But for the Environment Agency, criticised for its response in previous winters, the priority has been protecting people on the east coast tonight.
And we've got over 800 staff currently working on this incident, right through from the northeast to the southeast. So it's a big stretch, but we've planned and prepared for this, and we've moved temporary barriers and pumps over to the east coast to supplement our defences.
Tonight, the agency says 12 kilometres of flood defences are helping to protect Great Yarmouth as the waters reach their peak.
And Ben Chapman is live in Great Yarmouth and joins us now. Ben, how's it looking there tonight?
Well, there is a collective sigh of relief here, because although people have been standing and watching this river get incredibly high, perilously high over the last couple of hours, it doesn't seem to have breached any of the defences. We haven't seen any reports of any significant flooding or overtopping of the banks tonight. The high tide was about half an hour ago, so people here are thinking they are out of the woods for now at least. I was here 3 years ago when the properties just across the river from here did flood. They seem to have got away with it tonight. It doesn't mean the whole of the east coast is in the clear. Lowestoft just south of here is getting its high tide about now. Jaywick down in Essex will get it at about midnight, so plenty of people a bit further south who are still worried about what might happen with this tidal surge tonight.
And the Environment Agency clearly under a lot of pressure to get the planning for this right. What's your assessment as to how they've coped with this in the last 48 hours?
Well, it's, I think, probably difficult to say how they've performed until the incident is completely over. But my sense is the preparedness seems to be much greater this time. The sense of the scale of the warnings, the fact that the military have been involved, the scale of warning people to evacuate their homes. Certainly the preparations that we've seen here tonight have been extremely detailed, and we've had rescue boats, and we've had mobile incident units, all as a just in case, really, preparing for the worst, for an organisation that's had 2 chairmen resign over the last couple of winters because of a perception of a bungled operation. I think they were playing it very safe, better safe than sorry, you would say.
Ben, thank you very much indeed. Now, the stakes in the battle over the NHS suddenly got higher tonight, with Theresa May appearing to point the finger of blame at some GPs for the crisis in accident and emergency departments. It emerged today that nearly half of hospitals in England declared a major alert in the first week of this year because of the pressure being put on them. But in an extraordinary intervention, Downing Street now says that pressure is being caused by some GPs failing to deliver on the NHS commitment to a 7-day service, an intervention which could put Mrs May on a collision course with those doctors.
The inexorable pressure of winter is putting an enormous strain on the NHS. And this week has exposed just how acute that strain is and how A&E departments are buckling under the burden. Tonight, the Prime Minister has come up with her solution, demanding GPs remain open 7 days a week, blaming their early closing for fueling the A&E crisis. The Prime Minister says new research proves that GPs with longer hours reduce the demand on A&Es. She wants all GPs to be open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. unless they can prove there's no demand for it. And she's threatened to withhold extra funding for longer hours if they don't comply.
I accept there have been a small number of incidents where
This just days after she clashed with the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn over health service spending.
2,500 more people are treated within 4 hours every day in the National Health Service.
These new plans will be welcomed by Brenda Mountford and her family. She was forced to wait for hours on a trolley in a corridor at an A&E department in Oxfordshire. But her daughter-in-law Amanda said not before she'd spent 2 hours in an ambulance waiting to get into A&E.
It was very cold in the ambulance. It was a cold, frosty night. She was complaining she was cold. They had to keep starting the ambulance up for the heaters.
And her experience is far from isolated. Last week, 4 in 10 hospital trusts in England issued major alerts as bed shortages worsened and A&E departments became overwhelmed. 6 of them declared the highest alert, level 4, meaning patient safety was at risk. 2 of them in Bristol, 3 on Merseyside, 1 in Lancashire and 2 in the Midlands. What these figures show, and show starkly, is that the NHS in England is not only in crisis, but it's reaching breaking point. And although that strain is being felt acutely at A&E departments like this one, that huge pressure is also being brought to bear across the health service. In Wales, nearly 1 in 5 patients have been waiting longer than 4 hours, while Scotland was performing the best throughout the country. But NHS bosses say this winter has seen A&E departments at their busiest for 15 years, with many doctors never having experienced anything so bad.
3 or 4 things are causing it. First of all, we're becoming an older population. Secondly, we know that in some areas there are problems with social care. We also know that in some areas it's difficult for people to get a GP appointment. So what happens is people who quite rightly want to be seen by a medical professional, they see the lights on in the A&E department on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, so they go to the A&E department.
But tonight's astonishing intervention by Mrs May and her ministers will no doubt put them firmly at loggerheads with GPs. Sejal Karia, News at 10.
Another by-election is probably the last thing Jeremy Corbyn wanted for his troubled Labour Party right now, but that's exactly what he's got tonight. It's been brought about by the resignation of the MP for Stoke Central, Tristram Hunt, who's to become director of the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. Mr Corbyn says he's not lost control of the party, but the question being asked tonight is, will more Labour MPs quit?
It wasn't exactly a secret that Tristram Hunt disagreed with Jeremy Corbyn on almost all areas of party policy. But in quitting Labour at a time of some very poor poll ratings to run the very famous and now very popular Victoria and Albert Museum, the Alexander McQueen exhibition drew more visitors than ever. The two men have finally found something on which they can agree.
Last thing I wrote on the letter was, I look forward to visiting the V&A to meet you as director to have a look around.
Tristram Hunt didn't voice his criticisms of Jeremy Corbyn in his resignation letter. In fact, he wrote, I'm sorry to put you, the party and the people of Stoke-on-Trent through a by-election. I have no desire to rock the boat now, and anyone who interprets my decision to leave in that way is just plain wrong.
I haven't lost control of the party. The party isn't out of control. We're a very large party with a growing membership. We have a vibrant policy-making process.
But the truth is, Mr Hunt was at times very vibrant when it came to expressing his views of Mr Corbyn.
I think if Jeremy leads us into a general election, we face a 1931-style wipeout for the Labour Party.
So did he really quit because he thought Mr Corbyn was leading Labour to another defeat?
Well, look, clearly we've got to look like a government in waiting, and there are colleagues concluding that that's not the case and going off and doing different things.
Jeremy Corbyn could now be facing 3 by-elections in the next few months. In Copeland in Cumbria, Jamie Reid resigned as the Labour MP last month. With Sellafield in the constituency, the Conservatives are making much of Jeremy Corbyn's opposition to nuclear power. In Lee in Greater Manchester, the Labour MP Andy Burnham is the favourite to become the new mayor there and would quit as the MP if he won. And in Tristram Hunt's constituency, Stoke Central, UKIP were in second place in the last election, just 5,000 votes behind Labour. Stoke-on-Trent is a city which has struggled since the decline of its famous potteries, and voters today had some advice for the sort of MP they'd like instead of Tristram Hunt.
He didn't actually come from here, did he?
It won't be any worse without him. Hopefully it'll be a bit better. Maybe UKIP will get in.
And as this city supported Brexit in the referendum, UKIP are planning to throw the kitchen sink at this.
I'm not saying that our future depends on winning it, but we're going to throw everything at this.
Because actually this is not only an important test for Labour and how they're doing after Brexit, but it's an important test to see what's the point in UKIP.
One thing that we do know from having worked in the constituency for a long time now is that the number one issue there by a clear margin is immigration. That's why there was such a strong Brexit leave in Stoke Central.
And after a week in which Mr Corbyn sent out mixed messages on immigration, Stoke is likely to be a tight fight.
The Labour Party is we're going to have to get used to fighting really tough fights in parts of England where UKIP think they can do well.
So is this resignation an isolated case or the start of something more dangerous for Labour?
And Chris is with me now. Is it the start of something more dangerous? Are there more Labour MPs contemplating making a move also?
A good question. I think the answer to that is possibly. Let's just deal with Tristram Hunt first. I don't think it would be possible to find a more perfect job for him. He's a historian, an academic, an author. It would have been very difficult in any circumstance for him to turn down the job as director of the V&A Museum. That said, a lot of the thinking in the Labour Party, those I spoke to today, was he wouldn't really be considering it. He might well have turned it down had he thought Labour were on track to win the next elections. I think it's worth making that point. As far as other Labour MPs are concerned, a few said to me, yes, I'm expecting a couple more. Other MPs said to me today, yes, I've had job offers, but I haven't taken them up. And then they added ... not yet. yet. So it's possible there could be more. I'll say no more than that. I think the real test, though, for Jeremy Corbyn is when it comes to these by-elections. Can he hold on to the by-elections? If he can, he's got no problem at all, clearly. Interestingly, tomorrow he's speaking to the Fabian Society, the left-wing think tank, who you might recall...
Yes, they were pretty critical earlier in January,
Exactly.
weren't they?
At the beginning of the year, they said that Labour would sink to 20% of the vote in the next election and might have as few as 150 MPs. But I think perhaps the most interesting part of the story, for me anyway, was how Theresa May herself, because of the position, had to sign this one off. And I wonder how long it took her to see, Tristram Hunt, director of V&A, wants to resign an MP. Probably about 10 seconds, I think.
Well, let's stay with the Prime Minister, because seemingly an extraordinary intervention on the crisis in A&E in England's hospitals tonight, and some very pointed commentary about England's GPs, or some of them at least.
Yes, some GPs. I think it's quite clear to say that Downing Street say they're not pointing the finger at all GPs. In fact, there's a quote here from a Number 10 spokesman. Most GPs do a fantastic job, they say. However, there's always a however, it's increasingly clear that a large number of surgeries are not providing access that patients need, and patients are suffering as a result. She's also threatening to withhold some funding. There's a pot of funding for extended opening hours. She's going to withhold that if GP surgeries can't prove that they've done that. I think, as you rightly say, it's a very risky strategy when you start siding with one part of the NHS, albeit this concerns just England, not the other parts of the UK. But pointing the finger at doctors in this way is a very risky strategy.
OK, Chris, we'll see how it unfolds over the weekend. Thank you very much indeed for that. So perhaps not a total wall of official silence has descended over the role of a former British secret agent in compiling the infamous leaked dossier about Donald Trump, but it was a question very firmly battered away by Theresa May at a news conference today. She could hardly have been more terse. The individual who produced this dossier, as she put it, hasn't worked for the UK government for years.
The British former spy at the centre of the dossier on Donald Trump remains in hiding tonight, but his intelligence gathering continues to cause reverberations around the world. Today, the Prime Minister wouldn't be drawn on whether it was compiled with the help of British spy agencies.
It's a long-standing position that we don't comment on such matters, but I think from everything that you will have seen, it is absolutely clear that the individual who produced this dossier has not worked for the UK government for years.
The man who compiled the dossier, Christopher Steele, was an MI6 agent posted to Moscow in the early 1990s. He left the Secret Intelligence Service and set up a private firm helping clients do business in Russia in 2009. After 2010, ITV News understands while working for the FA, he came across information which he would later share with the FBI. It formed part of their investigation into FIFA, which led to a series of raids and eventually the downfall of FIFA President Sepp Blatter. It further cements Christopher Steele's reputation as a reliable and thorough investigator. But today Donald Trump sought to undermine Christopher Steele in a tweet saying, "It now turns out that the phony allegations against me were put together by my political opponents and a failed spy afraid of being sued." But Democrats are calling for clarity about Donald Trump's relationship with Russia.
The American people are owed the truth, and there is a great deal of evidence to say that this is an issue of high interest to the American people, the strength, the integrity of our own democracy.
Do you pass on information to the Americans, sir?
And now into this ever more complex story steps Sir Andrew Wood, former British ambassador to Moscow, who denies passing the dossier on to the Americans when discussing its contents with Senator John McCain. But he has described Christopher Steele as a competent professional operator. Tonight, ITV News understands Christopher Steele is still in the UK, a man who's angered both the Russians and the President-elect of the United States. He's understandably trying to keep his head down. Dan Rivers, News at 10.
A court has heard claims that the former entertainer Rolf Harris assaulted a 12-year-old girl as she stood inches away from her mother. He then signed an autograph for her. Harris denies assaulting 7 women in attacks spanning 30 years. He appeared via video link from Stafford Prison, where he is currently serving a sentence for attacks on 4 female victims. Now, it's tough enough trying to buy your first home when house prices are so high, but News at 10 has discovered that even if you scrape the money together, you might not be getting what you think. Latest figures show that more than 335,000 people bought a home for the first time last year. That's the most since 2007, before the financial crash. The average cost of a first-time home is just over £200,000, the highest on record. But there is a trap for the unwary. More and more new houses have been sold as leaseholds, which means you don't own the land your home is on and could face massive extra costs.
When you buy a house, you think you own all of it, but for thousands in the UK, that's not quite the case. Costly and escalating hidden charges are hitting families across the country. Flats with shared communal space are often leaseholds, with developers charging owners annual ground rent. But 5 years ago, Bolton neighbours Claire and Andrew bought houses as leaseholds from one of the nation's largest developers. Something they didn't realise at the time, that fee would double every 10 years. The £295 annual charge would be almost £10,000 a year by 2060. So angry, Andrew's wife wrote to Theresa May.
So this is the letter that Karen's got back from the Prime Minister after she wrote concerning the input of our MP on the matter. In our case, being older, the house really is our legacy to the family, and we're going to be leaving something that essentially isn't worth very much.
His neighbour Claire, a first-time buyer, now can't sell her home.
In the summer we had a couple that were very keen to buy it, very excited. They went in to sign the contracts and their solicitor spotted the ground rent clause. They said, look, do whatever you want to do, but we cannot advise that you buy this house with a lease such as that.
So how do you feel? You must feel...
I think shocked. I think pure dismay, cheated.
A rapidly increasing number of new-build houses are now being sold as leaseholds. In 2010, it was less than 3,500. By 2015, it had more than doubled to nearly 9,000. In all, 45,000 new houses have been registered as leaseholds.
The developers are building leasehold houses because they make far more money out of it. They sell freeholds, between 300 and 500 million pounds worth of freeholds every year. That is a colossal sum of money, and they're selling it for nothing. The ground rents offer no service whatsoever.
It's the same story in another part of Bolton. Here, homeowners say they used Taylor Wimpey's recommended solicitor, who, they claim, didn't fully explain what they were signing up for.
I thought that by using their solicitor, I would get the best service. Unfortunately, it's completely the opposite.
Carl's angry that their ground rent has just doubled to £600 a year.
They're like highwaymen. It's just robbery. You know, there's nothing, as we say, no services attached to the money.
Campaigners recently met Sajid Javid, the cabinet minister responsible for this, and they are hopeful that when he publishes his plans for UK housing by the end of the month, he'll crack down. But until then, some of Britain's best-known housing developers are making money, apparently for nothing, out of homeowners up and down the country. There is change afoot. One of the developers, Taylor Wimpey, said it stopped doubling ground rents in 2011 when economic conditions changed, and that this year, all the new houses it builds will be freehold. Small comfort for families stuck in houses they own, but can't sell. Allegra Stratton, News at 10, Bolton.
And for more on this story, who it is affecting and why it's a problem now, you can find out more on our website at itv.com/news. Now, it hardly seems 6 months since Theresa May stood on the steps of Downing Street as the new PM, but it is exactly that. On that day, she promised a bold new Britain outside the European Union. But 6 months on, do we know what that bold new Britain might be? You'll remember the final vote for Brexit was 52% to 48%. Well, one town in England matched that split exactly. In Basingstoke, just over 52,000 people voted to leave and just over 48,000 to remain. Very little maths needed, of course, to see that also breaks down to 52-48%. So a good place then, with Britain now on the brink of triggering Article 50 to take the Brexit temperature.
In Basingstoke, they make a little bit of everything.
We make things that go in and out, up and down, round and round.
OK, simple.
Simple, yeah.
From car parts to cancer scanners, this engineering firm can tackle most things, including Brexit.
The boss didn't vote to leave, but he's accepted it, if only he knew what it means for his exports.
I just need a decision. Whether it's hard, soft, let's just get something sorted. I can understand the delays because I feel it might weaken their negotiating position, but as a business moving forward, we need to know what to do.
Not many of his workers followed the boss's advice.
How did you vote in the referendum?
I voted to leave.
And 6 months into her job, they also want the Prime Minister to deliver, but they have no regrets.
I can see myself now buying a house and not struggling as much and having more of a future than there was.
Do you think you're going to get what you want, what you voted for?
Yeah, well, I voted out, so we're coming out. That's, at the end of the day, if it doesn't work out, I voted out, so I'll deal with the consequences. That was my opinion, that was my vote.
He's one of the 52% who voted out in Basingstoke, this 1960s new town rejecting the old order. In a town built for incomers, recent immigration does come up here. So too does the economy. But the one thing people keep telling us they want more than anything from the new Prime Minister is just any kind of plan. Everywhere, people are impatient for at least a few snippets.
How do you think the Prime Minister's doing in terms of the progress with Brexit?
Taking too long and too hesitant, basically. Decisions being made by the country, draw a line and move on.
Very up in the air, not knowing what's going to happen and how things are going to change.
And how it's going to affect the future of our kids, because we've got more young ones, and is it going to give them the same freedom that we've had?
So whether young or old, leave or remain, people here have given the Prime Minister 6 months in the new job, and now they want to see her long-term contract for the coming years. Paul Brandt, ITV News, Basingstoke.
For 18 tempestuous years, Lord Snowdon was one half of the ultimate glamorous couple. His marriage to the Queen's sister, Princess Margaret, the first commoner to wed the daughter of a king in 400 years, seemed to symbolise all the glitter of the swinging 60s. But Lord Snowdon, who's died today at the age of 86, had his own career, of course, too. As high society's favoured photographer, he became the chronicler of celebrity in an age of beautiful people.
The first commoner to marry into royalty for more than 400 years. Anthony Armstrong-Jones broke many of the established rules when he married Princess Margaret in 1960. They were the it couple of their generation. Ironically, the professional photographer, now himself the centre of paparazzi attention. In many ways, they defined the swinging 60s. But despite this glamorous lifestyle in the company of some of the most famous faces of the day, photography remained his passion.
He almost lived for work. He loved his work. And he told me that Princess Margaret was absolutely marvellous in saying that, yes, you must go on with it, because she knew how much it meant to him.
His portraits of world-renowned singers, artists and actors spanning the second half of the 20th century made up a hugely impressive body of work, much of which is now hung in the National Portrait Gallery. He and David Bailey were brought together recently by Vogue magazine, where both had been regular contributors since the 1960s.
He looks rather good.
Yeah.
Looks better there than he does now, that's for sure.
He was less known for his work as a designer.
Northern Aviary. Rather an unimaginative title for such an imaginative conception as Lord Snowdon's design for a giant birdcage at London Zoo.
Seen as very avant-garde, the aviary was one of his proudest achievements.
And wire netting between you and the animals in a zoo.
His marriage to Princess Margaret ended in divorce after 18 years, but they had 2 children and remained on good terms. The Queen was said to be saddened by his death. Despite his achievements, which included campaigning for disabled rights throughout his life, following childhood polio, which left him with a limp, Lord Snowdon will probably be best remembered as the photographer who married a princess. One half of the most glamorous couple of their times, a royal rebel who briefly captured the spirit of a decade.
The death today of Lord Snowdon, photographer and former husband of the late Princess Margaret. And finally, far above the storms brought on by the weather and far above the political storms too blowing across both sides of the Atlantic, 2 astronauts have been enjoying the tranquility of space. The pair, one French, one American, were doing important work outside the International Space Station, upgrading its power systems, but on an ominous date like today's. What a way of getting away from it all too. Amazing pictures. And with that, and of course, that all-important weather forecast are both coming up. But from all of us here on News at 10 tonight, good night.